A black woman, Alana Jones, was denied headphones in first class. Minutes later, she fired the entire crew. On a flight where first-class luxury is reserved for the elite, one passenger faces an unexpected test of dignity and respect. Alana Jones, a black woman calmly seated in her rightful place, is met with shocking treatment from the crew. What happens next is not just a fight for fairness. It's a story of resilience, justice, and a twist that will leave you speechless. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now let's get into it. The airport buzzed with the controlled chaos of travelers moving with purpose. Families shuffled through security checkpoints. Business people clutched their briefcases, and the occasional lost passenger glanced around in quiet desperation. Amid the hustle, Alana Jones moved with quiet confidence, her long coat flowing behind her, a leather tote in one hand and her boarding pass in the other. Alana didn't just walk. She glided, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. Her sharp eyes scanned the departure screens, even though she knew exactly where she was going. She had been here countless times before, always one step ahead, always prepared. But today was different. Today, Alana wasn't traveling for work or leisure. She was on this flight for a much-needed break, a rare moment to disconnect from the pressures of running a billion-dollar empire. The airline she was about to board was her pride and joy, a business she had nurtured from the ground up. It wasn't just a brand. It was a symbol of her resilience. She approached the first-class lounge, handing over her boarding pass with a warm smile. The attendant barely glanced at her before waving her through. Alana noticed the momentary hesitation, the flicker of judgment, but chose not to address it. She was used to these microaggressions, small moments of doubt in others' eyes. Her success had taught her to pick her battles carefully. The lounge was a sanctuary of polished wood, leather chairs, and muted conversations. Alana settled into a corner seat, sipping on a freshly brewed espresso while reviewing a novel she'd meant to read for weeks. For a fleeting moment, she felt at peace. Soon, her flight was called. As she made her way to the gate, she noticed a distinct change in the air. The staff's cordial smiles faded into rigid politeness when they saw her. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Alana's sharp instincts caught it instantly. She filed it away in her mind, not yet ready to confront the discomfort bubbling beneath the surface. At the boarding gate, a young man in a crisp uniform took her boarding pass and scanned it. His eyes darted to the first-class indicator on the ticket, and a flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Right this way, ma'am," he said, masking his disbelief poorly. Alana smiled graciously and stepped through, ignoring the unease building in her chest. She had dealt with worse in her life. Her success was often a shock to people who believed wealth and status had a particular face. Inside the cabin, the first-class section gleamed with luxury. Plush seats, personal screens, and a curated menu awaited the passengers fortunate enough to afford them. Alana settled into her window seat, adjusting her scarf as she gazed out at the tarmac. The hum of the plane's engines was a comforting reminder that soon she'd be soaring above the clouds, far away from everything that tethered her to the ground. The calm shattered when the flight attendant appeared. She was blonde, with a sharp, no-nonsense expression that bordered on hostility. Her name tag read, Sarah, and the irony wasn't lost on Alana. "Can I get you anything to drink?" Sarah asked, her tone clipped and devoid of warmth. Alana glanced up, offering a polite smile. "Just some water, please." Sarah nodded briskly and disappeared, her shoes clicking sharply against the polished floor. Alana let out a slow breath, convincing herself that she was imagining things. Maybe Sarah was having a bad day. Maybe it wasn't personal. But then, personal or not, Alana knew what was coming. She just didn't know how far it would go. As the other passengers settled into their seats, Sarah returned, handing out headphones to each person in the cabin. When she reached Alana's row, she hesitated. Her eyes lingered on Alana for a moment, too long, as if trying to calculate something. Alana decided to meet the moment head-on. "Could I have my headphones, please?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. Sarah's lips curled into something that might have been a smile in another universe. "Those are only for first-class passengers," she said, her words slow and deliberate. Alana blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. I am in first class, she said, gesturing to her seat and the boarding pass tucked neatly into her jacket pocket. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her smile sharpening into condescension. Of course, you are, she said before turning on her heel and moving to the next row. Alana sat frozen for a moment, her fingers tightening around the armrests. The murmur of other passengers began to rise, a wave of discomfort rippling through the cabin. She caught the glance of a woman seated across the aisle, her eyes wide with sympathy and silent outrage. Alana exhaled slowly, her heartbeat quickening. She had spent years climbing the ranks of an industry that hadn't wanted her there, and moments like this reminded her of every hurdle she'd overcome. But today wasn't the day to let it slide. Today, she would fight back, just not in the way they expected. Alana reached for her phone, her fingers brushing against the screen as she composed herself. This wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning. The hum of the aircraft engines filled the cabin as passengers settled in, adjusting their seats and flipping through in-flight magazines. Alana sat in her plush first-class seat, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She wore a calm expression, but a quiet storm brooded beneath her composed exterior. She turned her gaze to the small window beside her. The tarmac stretched out like an endless sea of concrete, dotted with the orange glow of maintenance lights. She had always loved this moment before a flight, the anticipation of leaving everything behind. But today, the peace she usually felt was absent, replaced by a gnawing irritation that she refused to let take root. Not yet. Sarah returned, weaving her way down the aisle, her polished heels clicking on the carpeted floor. She held a tray of water glasses, each one delicately balanced. When she stopped at Alana's row, there was a noticeable pause. Sarah leaned slightly, setting the water on Alana's tray table with a little more force than necessary. There you go, Sarah said, her tone laced with something just shy of a sneer. Her lips pursed as if forcing out the words cost her something. Alana looked up at her, meeting Sarah's gaze without flinching. Thank you, she said evenly, her voice calm but firm, refusing to acknowledge the insult Sarah clearly hoped would sting. Sarah's eyes narrowed for a split second before she turned and continued down the aisle, her ponytail swinging sharply with each step. Alana followed her with her eyes, noting the way Sarah smiled warmly at the next passenger, a middle-aged white man in a suit, before bending slightly to refill his water glass. The disparity was unmistakable, deliberate even. Alana sighed softly and picked up the glass of water, taking a small sip. It tasted faintly metallic, like it had been sitting in the pitcher too long. She set the glass back down with care, her fingers lingering on the cool rim as she replayed the interaction in her mind. This wasn't new. She had encountered people like Sarah before, people who saw her skin first and her accomplishments last, if at all. She had learned to navigate their microaggressions with grace, to choose her battles wisely. But today, something felt different. There was a simmering tension in the air, and Alana could feel it growing with each passing moment. Sarah reappeared moments later, this time with the headphones cart. She moved briskly, handing out pairs to each passenger with a bright smile and a cheerful, "Enjoy your flight." The other passengers responded with polite thanks, slipping the sleek devices over their ears as they settled in for the journey. When Sarah reached Alana's row, her smile disappeared. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the cart as if debating whether to proceed. Alana watched her with an expression of polite expectation, her posture straight and poised. "Excuse me," Alana said finally, her voice cutting through the soft hum of the cabin. "May I have my headphones, please?" Sarah straightened, her eyes scanning Alana from head to toe in an almost imperceptible flicker of disdain. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone saccharine and insincere. "We must have run out." Alana blinked. Her first instinct was to let it go, to avoid making a scene. But something in Sarah's expression, a glint of triumph, a challenge, made her pause. "Run out," Alana repeated, her voice soft but firm. She gestured to the cart, which was still half full. There seemed to be plenty left. Sarah's smile turned icy. "Those are reserved for passengers who pre-requested them," she said, her words slow and deliberate, as if speaking to a child. "It's standard policy." The cabin grew still, the tension palpable. Several passengers glanced over, their curiosity piqued. Alana felt their eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. She refused to be reduced to a spectacle. "I see," Alana said, folding her hands in her lap. Her voice was calm, controlled, but there was a sharpness to her tone that made Sarah's smile falter. I wasn't aware that standard policy excluded certain passengers. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but whatever she was about to say was interrupted by the man across the aisle. He cleared his throat loudly, drawing both women's attention. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tinged with indignation. "I didn't pre-request mine, and I still got a pair." Sarah froze, the color draining from her face as she turned to face him. Well, that's different," she stammered, her composure cracking for the first time. It's what?" The man pressed, his eyebrows raised. "Because from where I'm sitting, it doesn't look very different at all." Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting between Alana and the man. She seemed to weigh her options, debating whether to escalate or retreat. Finally, she turned back to Alana with a forced smile. "I'll see what I can do," she said, her voice tight. She snatched a pair of headphones from the cart and set them on Alana's tray table with a curt nod before walking away, her heels clicking sharply against the carpet. Alana sat in silence for a moment, staring at the headphones on her tray. The room felt heavier now, the tension thick enough to cut. She glanced at the man across the aisle, offering him a small nod of thanks. He nodded back, his expression one of quiet solidarity. As Alana slipped the headphones over her ears, she felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. She knew this wasn't over. Sarah's actions weren't just about headphones. They were about power, about control, about putting Alana in her place. And Alana wasn't about to let that happen. Not this time. She reached for her phone, her fingers moving with quiet purpose. This was no longer a matter of inconvenience. This was a matter of principle. The storm was coming, and Alana was ready. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane began to taxi to the runway. The muffled voice of the pilot drifted through the speakers, delivering the usual announcements about expected flight time and weather conditions. But Alana barely heard him. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the encounter with Sarah in vivid detail. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on her knees, her breathing slow and measured. To anyone watching, she appeared calm, unbothered even. But inside, a fire had been lit. Sarah's condescension wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger issue, a systemic arrogance that Alana had faced her entire life. And while she had chosen to walk away from such encounters many times before, today felt different. Today, she felt compelled to act. The plane had barely leveled off when Sarah reappeared, pushing a cart laden with drinks and snacks. Her face was set in a mask of professional politeness, but her movements were clipped, almost mechanical. When she reached Alana's row, she paused, her eyes darting briefly to meet Alana's before flitting away. "Would you like something to drink?" Sarah asked, her tone devoid of warmth. Alana looked up at her, her expression calm but piercing. "A glass of sparkling water, please." Sarah nodded curtly and reached for the bottle on the cart. She poured the water into a glass, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. But as she placed the glass on Alana's tray table, her hand slipped, ever so slightly. The glass tipped, its contents splashing onto Alana's lap and her leather tote bag. "Oh dear," Sarah said, her voice tinged with mock concern. "I'm so sorry." Alana stared at her lap, the water soaking into the fabric of her slacks. She reached for a napkin from the side of her tray, her movements slow and deliberate. Sarah stood there, watching her, lips twitching as if suppressing a smirk. "Let me get you a towel," Sarah said, but she made no move to fetch one. Alana dabbed at her lap, her jaw tightening. She looked up at Sarah, her gaze steady and unyielding. "I think that would be appropriate," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second before turning and walking briskly back to the galley. Alana watched her go, her mind racing. This wasn't an accident. The spill, the earlier denial of headphones, these were deliberate acts, small but cutting, designed to undermine and humiliate. As Alana continued to blot at her damp slacks, the man across the aisle leaned over. He was middle-aged, with a kind face and a quiet air of authority. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low but full of concern. Alana turned to him, offering a small smile. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you." The man shook his head, his brow furrowing. "That was intentional," he said quietly. "I saw her. She did it on purpose." Alana's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet determination. "I know," she said simply. The man sat back in his seat, watching her for a moment. "You shouldn't have to put up with this," he said finally. "If you need a witness, I'm happy to back you up." Alana nodded, her heart warming slightly at his support. "I appreciate that," she said, "but I have my own way of handling things." When Sarah returned, she placed a towel on Alana's tray table without a word and moved on to the next row. Alana picked up the towel, dabbing at her bag and slacks with care. Her movements were slow, almost meditative, as she considered her next steps. Once the initial cleanup was done, Alana reached for her phone again. She opened her contacts list and scrolled down until she found the name she was looking for, Brian Jones, the CEO of the airline. She tapped on the number, her thumb hovering over the call button for a moment before pressing it. The phone rang twice before Brian answered. "Alana," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "What a surprise. What can I do for you?" Alana glanced around the cabin, her voice low but firm. "Brian, I'm on flight 472. There's an issue with the crew." There was a brief pause on the other end. "What kind of issue?" Brian asked, his tone shifting to one of concern. Alana gave him a succinct account of what had happened, her words measured but pointed. She didn't embellish or dramatize. The facts alone were damning enough. By the time she finished, Brian's voice was tight with anger. "This is unacceptable," he said. "I'll handle it personally." Alana thanked him and ended the call, slipping her phone back into her bag. She leaned back in her seat, her hands resting on the armrests. The storm inside her had calmed, replaced by a quiet sense of resolve. Justice was coming, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small or unworthy by people like Sarah. The rest of the flight passed in a tense silence. Sarah avoided Alana's row entirely, her earlier bravado replaced by a noticeable unease. The other passengers exchanged glances, their curiosity palpable. They didn't know what was happening, but they could sense that something was about to change. Alana closed her eyes, her breathing slow and steady. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't even upset. She was focused, her mind clear and her purpose unwavering. She didn't just want an apology or compensation. She wanted accountability. She wanted change. As the plane began its descent, Alana opened her eyes and looked out the window. The city lights glittered below, a tapestry of possibilities stretching out into the horizon. She took a deep breath, bracing herself for what was to come. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The cabin lights brightened slightly as the plane began its final descent, the hum of the engines deepening. Passengers stirred in their seats, stretching stiff limbs and fastening seat belts. The rhythmic chime of an announcement rang through the air, but Alana barely registered the words. Her focus was elsewhere. The city below came into view, its lights sprawling like a galaxy of stars scattered across the dark canvas of the earth. Alana stared out the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one tethered to the quiet storm she had carried throughout the flight. As the plane touched down, a soft bump jostled the cabin. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the passengers, many of whom were eager to disembark. Alana remained seated, her posture poised, her expression calm but unreadable. She knew that what was about to happen would ripple far beyond this small cabin. The aircraft taxied to the gate, the metallic groan of its brakes filling the silence. Sarah's voice came over the intercom, her tone cheerful and professional, as if the events of the flight had never transpired. "Welcome to your destination," she announced. "Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off." Alana's lips tightened into a faint line. Sarah's feigned politeness grated against her, but she remained still, her hands resting lightly on her lap. The storm inside her was no longer raging. It had condensed into something sharp and focused. As the plane came to a complete stop, Sarah and the other attendants moved through the cabin, smiling at passengers and wishing them a pleasant day. When Sarah reached Alana's row, their eyes met for a brief moment. Alana held her gaze, her expression steady and unyielding. Sarah broke eye contact first, her smile faltering. She quickly moved on, her demeanor less confident than before. Alana watched her retreat, her mind noting every detail, the stiffness in her movements, the forced cheer in her voice. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and the passengers began to gather their belongings. Alana remained seated, her movements unhurried as she slipped her phone into her tote and reached for her coat. She didn't rush. There was no need. As the first-class passengers began to disembark, a man in a tailored suit entered the cabin. His presence was commanding, his stride purposeful. He was accompanied by 2 airline staff members, their expressions a mix of nervousness and determination. The man's sharp eyes scanned the cabin until they landed on Alana. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement. It was Brian Jones, the airline CEO. Brian approached Alana's row, pausing to greet her with a firm handshake. "Alana," he said, his voice low but carrying an undeniable authority. "I apologize for the delay. May I have a word with you?" Alana stood, slipping her coat over her shoulders. "Of course," she said, her tone measured. She gestured toward the aisle, indicating for him to lead the way. As they exited the plane, Brian turned to the 2 staff members accompanying him. "Please ensure the other passengers are taken care of," he instructed. "I'll handle this personally." They nodded and stepped aside, their expressions tinged with relief. Alana followed Brian into the jet bridge, where a small team of senior airline staff waited. Sarah stood among them, her face pale and her hands clenched tightly at her sides. She avoided looking at Alana, her earlier confidence replaced by a visible unease. Brian turned to Sarah, his expression neutral but his tone cold. "Sarah," he said, "I understand there have been issues on this flight. Would you care to explain?" Sarah stammered, her words tumbling out in a rush. I don't know what you mean, sir." Everything went smoothly. There were no complaints from the passengers. Brian raised an eyebrow, his gaze hardening. "Is that so?" he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Because I've received a very different account." Alana stepped forward, her presence commanding. "Mr. Jones," she said, addressing Brian formally, "if I may." Brian gestured for her to proceed. Alana turned to Sarah, her gaze steady. "Your behavior on this flight was not only unprofessional, but also discriminatory. You denied me services that were provided to other passengers without question. You spilled water on me and my belongings, then failed to take responsibility. And let's not forget the condescension in your tone and actions." Sarah's face turned red, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to form a response. I didn't mean." Alana held up a hand, cutting her off. "This isn't about what you meant. It's about what you did. And what you did was unacceptable." Brian turned to the senior staff, his voice sharp and decisive. "Sarah's actions are a violation of our company's code of conduct. Effective immediately, she is relieved of her duties. Ensure she is escorted off the premises." Sarah's eyes widened, her face draining of color. "Wait, please," she stammered. "It was a mistake. I didn't." Brian cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Your behavior has no place in this company," he said. "Consider this your final lesson in accountability." 2 security personnel stepped forward, gently but firmly guiding Sarah away. Her protests faded as she disappeared down the corridor, leaving the jet bridge in a heavy silence. Brian turned back to Alana, his expression softening. "Alana, I cannot apologize enough for what happened. I assure you, this incident will lead to immediate changes in our staff training and hiring practices." Alana nodded, her gaze steady. "Thank you, Brian. But this isn't just about me. This is about ensuring that no one else has to endure what I did today." Brian inclined his head. "You have my word." As the senior staff dispersed, Alana stood alone in the quiet jet bridge. She took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since the flight began. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a precedent had been set. She walked toward the terminal, her steps light but purposeful. The storm had passed, but its impact would linger, a reminder that standing up for what is right can spark change, not just for one person, but for everyone. Alana walked through the terminal with the steady stride of someone who had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. The bustling sounds of travelers and the distant hum of announcements seemed distant, muffled by the thoughts racing through her mind. Though she appeared composed on the surface, her heart carried the weight of what had just transpired. As she approached the lounge reserved for first-class passengers, she caught sight of her reflection in the glass doors. Her coat was slightly wrinkled from the flight, her slacks still damp from the spill Sarah had so carelessly caused. Yet, her posture remained impeccable. Strength wasn't about perfection, it was about endurance, and today had demanded plenty of that. She stepped inside, the lounge's quiet elegance enveloping her. A concierge immediately approached, offering to assist with her belongings. Alana declined with a polite smile. She needed a moment alone before deciding her next steps. Alana found a seat by the large windows overlooking the tarmac. Planes taxied in the distance, their silhouettes illuminated against the fading twilight. She sipped on a cup of herbal tea, the warmth spreading through her fingers as she cradled the delicate porcelain cup. It was a small comfort, but one she welcomed. Her phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with notifications. Word had begun to spread. A text from her assistant popped up first. Heard what happened. Do you need me to draft a statement? Alana smiled faintly, appreciating the efficiency, but knowing this wasn't the time for public announcements. She typed back quickly. Not yet. This is personal. I'll handle it. The tea grew cold as she sat there, her mind revisiting every detail of the flight. She thought of Sarah's face, how smug it had been when she denied Alana service, how it had crumbled when faced with accountability. The memory didn't bring her satisfaction. Instead, it fueled a deeper resolve. Alana didn't want vengeance. She wanted systemic change. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled Alana from her thoughts. She glanced up to see the man from across the aisle on the flight. He was holding a small carry-on bag, his expression a mix of hesitation and determination. Excuse me, Miss Jones, he said, his voice tentative but warm. I don't mean to intrude, but I wanted to thank you. Alana tilted her head, a small crease forming between her brows. Thank me? She asked, gesturing for him to sit. For what? He set his bag down and took the seat across from her. For standing up to that flight attendant, he said. I saw what happened, and I should have spoken up sooner. But watching you handle it with such grace, well, it reminded me that silence isn't the answer. Alana studied him for a moment. He seemed genuine, his words carrying the weight of self-reflection. It wasn't easy, she admitted, but letting it go would have been harder. This isn't the first time I've faced something like this, and I doubt it'll be the last. The man nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. You're right, he said. It happens far too often. And the rest of us, those who see it and say nothing, we're part of the problem. Alana's expression softened. It's never too late to do better, she said. Speaking up now matters just as much. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the lounge filling the space between them. Then, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. I run a nonprofit, he said. We focus on workplace equity and anti-discrimination training. If there's ever a way we can collaborate, I'd be honored. Alana picked up the card, her eyes scanning the embossed text. A faint smile curved her lips. Thank you, she said, slipping the card into her bag. I'll keep this in mind. As the man departed, Alana leaned back in her chair, her thoughts shifting to the bigger picture. Sarah was just one person, one symptom of a much larger issue. Addressing her behavior was a start, but it wasn't enough. If Alana truly wanted to create lasting change, she needed to go beyond the immediate incident. She reached for her phone again, this time drafting a message to Brian Jones. Brian, thank you for addressing the situation on the flight. I'd like to propose something further, a comprehensive review of our employee training programs, with a focus on inclusivity and unconscious bias. Let's ensure that this isn't just an isolated correction, but a turning point for our company. Alana reread the message before hitting send. It wasn't just about her experience. It was about ensuring no one else had to endure the same. As the evening deepened, Alana received a reply from Brian. Absolutely. Let's meet next week to discuss this in detail. Your leadership is invaluable, Alana. Thank you for bringing this to light. Alana set the phone down and gazed out at the darkening horizon. The city lights blinked like stars, a reminder of endless possibilities. She felt a sense of calm wash over her, not because the fight was over, but because it had only just begun. This wasn't the end of the story. It was a new chapter, one that would ripple far beyond this single flight. Alana had turned a moment of injustice into an opportunity for change, proving that even in the face of adversity, grace and resolve could lead to something greater. She took another sip of tea, savoring its warmth. Outside, a plane ascended into the sky, its lights disappearing into the darkness. Alana watched it go, her heart steady, her purpose clear. The following days unfolded like a slow dance, each moment carefully measured and deliberate. Alana had returned home to her city penthouse, its sleek modernity a contrast to the whirlwind of emotions she carried. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a sprawling skyline, glittering in the evening light. The city seemed serene, unaware of the battles waged in its countless corners, battles like the one she had fought on that flight. She sat at her dining table, a steaming cup of chamomile tea in her hands. The room was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of the evening breeze through the open balcony doors. Her laptop sat before her, its screen illuminated with emails, documents, and one particular message she had been rereading all evening. Alana, I've spoken with the board. They're on board with your proposal for company-wide changes. Let's draft an agenda for next week's meeting. Brian Jones. The words were encouraging, yet they also bore a heavy weight. Change on this scale wasn't just about drafting policies or mandating training sessions. It was about shifting mindsets, dismantling biases embedded so deeply they were often invisible. Alana knew this wouldn't be easy, but then again, nothing worth achieving ever was. The meeting room was bathed in morning light, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of the bustling city below. Around the long oak table sat senior executives, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Brian Jones stood at the head, his usual confident demeanor tempered with seriousness. Alana entered the room with her usual grace, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She wore a tailored navy suit, its sharp lines mirroring the determination in her eyes. As she took her seat, she felt the weight of their gazes, some respectful, others cautious. She welcomed both. Thank you all for being here, Brian began, his voice steady. As you're aware, an incident occurred on one of our flights recently. It has brought to light areas where we need significant improvement, not just as a company, but as individuals. He gestured to Alana. Alana Jones, our executive vice president, is here to outline her vision for how we move forward. Alana nodded and stood, her presence commanding yet approachable. She began with a recounting of the flight, her tone calm but unwavering. She didn't embellish or dramatize. The facts spoke loudly enough on their own. As she spoke, she noticed subtle shifts in the room. Some executives leaned forward, their interest piqued. Others exchanged glances, their expressions hard to read. Alana pressed on, laying out her proposal for a comprehensive inclusivity program, mandatory training on unconscious bias, a review of hiring and promotion practices, and the establishment of an internal committee to oversee these initiatives. This isn't just about preventing incidents like the one I experienced, she concluded. It's about creating a culture where every employee and every customer feels respected and valued. If we can achieve that, we won't just be an airline, we'll be a beacon of progress in this industry. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the table like a thick fog. Then, slowly, Brian began to clap. One by one, the others joined him, some hesitant, others enthusiastic. It's a bold plan, Brian said as the applause faded, but it's the right one. Let's make it happen. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, drafts, and negotiations. Not everyone was on board with Alana's vision. Some executives argued that the changes were too ambitious, too disruptive. Others questioned the cost, both financial and reputational. Alana met each challenge with patience and resolve. She anticipated their resistance, knew their objections stemmed from fear of change, fear of accountability. But she also knew that fear was no excuse for inaction. In one particularly heated meeting, an executive stood, his tone sharp. Alana, with all due respect, do you really think this is necessary? That flight attendant was dealt with. Isn't that enough? Alana fixed him with a steady gaze. No, she said, her voice calm but firm. It's not enough to address the symptoms. We have to treat the root cause. Otherwise, we're just waiting for the next incident to occur. The room fell silent, the executive sinking back into his chair. Alana's words lingered in the air, a challenge that none could refute. Late one evening, as Alana was leaving the office, she was stopped by a young employee in the lobby. He was a flight attendant, his crisp uniform slightly rumpled, his face nervous yet earnest. Miss Jones, he began, his voice trembling slightly. I just wanted to thank you. Alana tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. For what? She asked. For speaking up, he said, his words rushing out in a torrent. I've seen things, heard things that didn't sit right with me, but I didn't think I could do anything about it. Seeing what you did, it gave me hope. It made me realize that change is possible. Alana's expression softened. She reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Change is always possible, she said, but it takes all of us to make it happen. Your voice matters. Don't ever forget that." The young man nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. As he walked away, Alana felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. This was why she fought, not for herself, but for people like him, people who needed to see that standing up for what was right could make a difference. Weeks later, the airline launched its new inclusivity program, a sweeping initiative that garnered attention both within the industry and beyond. The first training session was held in a large auditorium, packed with employees from every department. Alana stood at the podium, addressing the crowd with the same grace and conviction she had shown in the boardroom. "This isn't the end of the journey," she said. "It's just the beginning. Together, we can build a future where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued. Let's make that future a reality." The room erupted into applause, the energy palpable. Alana felt a swell of pride, not for herself, but for the collective effort that had brought them to this moment. As she stepped off the stage, she glanced toward the back of the room. Brian stood there, watching her with a smile. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of all they had achieved together. Alana nodded back, her heart steady, her purpose clear. This was more than a victory. It was a transformation, a seed of change that would grow far beyond anything they could imagine. The weeks following the launch of the inclusivity program were both triumphant and exhausting. For every step forward, there were subtle reminders of the roadblocks that remained. Alana often found herself at her desk late into the night, poring over feedback from the training sessions, reviewing incident reports from employees, and drafting new policies to address the concerns that surfaced. Her office overlooked the city, its lights twinkling like silent witnesses to her relentless efforts. Papers were scattered across her desk, a half-finished cup of tea, long gone cold, beside her laptop. Alana rubbed her temples, her focus faltering as fatigue began to creep in. Yet, she couldn't stop. The stakes were too high. One evening, just as Alana was preparing to leave the office, her assistant entered, carrying a thick envelope. "This came for you," she said, setting it on Alana's desk. Alana picked up the envelope, noting the airline's logo stamped on the corner. Inside was a letter, written in careful cursive on high-quality stationery. The sender was anonymous, but the contents were anything but vague. "Miss Jones, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I feel compelled to share my story. I've been with the airline for over 20 years. In that time, I've seen the good, the bad, and everything in between. For too long, I stayed silent about the things I saw, comments, actions, and decisions that didn't align with the values we claim to uphold. When I heard about your experience on that flight, it struck a nerve, not because it surprised me, but because it was finally being addressed. I wanted to thank you for standing up, not just for yourself, but for all of us who felt marginalized or silenced. Your courage has sparked something I never thought I'd see, hope. I'm not signing my name because I'm still finding my own courage, but I wanted you to know that your efforts matter. Please don't stop." Alana read the letter twice, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper as her thoughts swirled. The letter's words were raw, honest, and deeply personal. They reminded her of the countless faces she'd seen during the training sessions, some eager, others hesitant, and a few outright resistant. This letter was proof that the seeds she'd planted were beginning to take root. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer. It was a small but profound reminder of why she couldn't afford to falter now. Despite the program's early successes, not everyone welcomed the changes. Whispers of dissent began to circulate among the staff, subtle but insidious. Some employees complained that the training sessions were unnecessary, labeling them as overreactions to isolated incidents. Others resisted more openly, questioning the need for inclusivity initiatives at all. Alana heard about these murmurs during a routine meeting with the newly formed Inclusivity Committee. One member, a young woman from Human Resources named Elena, voiced her concerns hesitantly. "We've been monitoring feedback from the sessions," Elena said, her voice steady but her eyes uncertain. "Most of it has been positive, but there's a small group that, well, they're not on board. They think the changes are too much, too fast." Alana leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Change is never comfortable," she said, "and those who resist it often do so because it forces them to confront their own biases. That doesn't mean we stop. It means we push harder." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the group. Elena nodded, her confidence bolstered. "You're right, she said. We'll keep moving forward. Late one night, Alana sat alone in her penthouse, the city's lights casting a soft glow across the room. The letter from the anonymous employee lay on the coffee table, its words echoing in her mind. Despite the progress they'd made, doubt began to creep in. Was she doing enough? Could one person truly change a system so deeply entrenched in its ways? And if not, was it worth the fight? Alana closed her eyes, leaning back against the couch. Her mind wandered to memories of her childhood, the quiet resilience of her mother, who had taught her to stand tall even when the world tried to shrink her. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, soft but firm. Change doesn't happen in a day, Alana, but it starts with a choice. And that choice is yours to make. The memory steadied her, grounding her in the truth she had always known. Change was slow, messy, and often thankless, but it was also necessary. And she had made her choice long ago. A week later, during a routine board meeting, an unexpected voice spoke up. It was the same executive who had questioned the program's necessity weeks earlier. He stood, clearing his throat as the room turned its attention to him. I'll admit, he began, his tone hesitant, I wasn't fully on board with this initiative at first. But after attending one of the training sessions and hearing the experiences shared by our staff, I realized how much I didn't know about their struggles, about my own blind spots. He glanced at Alana, his expression sincere. I wanted to thank you, Alana, for pushing us to do better. It's uncomfortable, but it's also necessary. Alana felt a flicker of surprise, followed by a swell of gratitude. She nodded, her voice calm but warm. Thank you for being open to change, she said. That's all I've ever asked. As the program continued to unfold, its impact became undeniable. Complaints of discrimination decreased. Employee satisfaction surveys reflected a growing sense of inclusion, and even customers began to notice the shift in the airline's culture. Alana often found herself reflecting on the journey so far. It hadn't been easy, and she knew it never would be. But as she sat in her office one evening, looking out at the city that had become her home, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. This wasn't the end of the story. It was another step in a journey that would continue long after she was gone. And that was enough. The months following the Inclusivity program's launch were transformative, both for the airline and for Alana. What had begun as a response to a singular incident evolved into a company-wide cultural shift that rippled across the entire industry. Alana had spearheaded the program with her usual precision and resilience, but even she was unprepared for how far the impact would reach. Feedback from employees poured in steadily, each message painting a picture of progress. Stories emerged of coworkers standing up for one another, of managers reevaluating their biases, and of customers noticing a newfound warmth and professionalism among the airline staff. Alana saw these stories as milestones, proof that the seeds she had planted were beginning to grow. But she also knew that progress was never linear. Resistance lingered, quiet but persistent, in corners of the organization. Some employees were vocal about their dissatisfaction with the changes, labeling them as overreactions or unnecessary. Alana didn't let it deter her. Change wasn't about pleasing everyone. It was about doing what was right. One afternoon, Alana was in her office, reviewing a report on the program's performance metrics, when her phone buzzed. It was Brian Jones. His tone was serious, yet laced with excitement. Alana, he began, I've just had a fascinating conversation with a group of CEOs from other airlines. They've been watching what we've done here, and they're impressed. Alana leaned back in her chair, intrigued. What kind of conversation are we talking about? Brian chuckled. They want to replicate what we've done, not just within their companies, but across the industry. They're proposing an industry-wide initiative, and they want you to lead it. The words hung in the air, their weight settling on Alana's shoulders. She felt a surge of pride, but it was tempered by the magnitude of what Brian was suggesting. Brian, that's ambitious, she said, her voice steady but thoughtful. Do you really think they'll follow through? They're serious, Alana, Brian said. And frankly, they need someone with your vision and leadership to guide them. This is your chance to make an even bigger impact. Alana sat in silence for a moment, her mind racing. She thought about the anonymous letter she had received, about the young flight attendant who had thanked her, about all the faces she had seen during the training sessions. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was a responsibility. I'll do it, she said finally, her voice firm. If it means creating real change, I'm in. The news of Alana's new role spread quickly throughout the airline. Her colleagues, though saddened by her departure, celebrated her achievement with a mix of admiration and gratitude. A farewell event was planned, an elegant evening gathering that reflected Alana's understated yet impactful presence. That night, she stood before a room filled with familiar faces, her heart swelling with both pride and nostalgia. The warm glow of chandeliers illuminated the space as her coworkers raised their glasses in her honor. "Thank you," Alana began, her voice carrying over the quiet murmur of the crowd. "Not just for tonight, but for trusting me, for believing in what we've built together. This isn't goodbye. It's the beginning of something much larger. What we've started here is proof that change is possible, even when it feels impossible." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I promise to carry the lessons we've learned here into this next chapter, and I know that together, we've laid the foundation for something that will continue to grow." The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the impact she had made. Alana's final day at the airline was bittersweet. She boarded a flight to Washington, D.C., where the headquarters for the new initiative awaited her. The journey felt symbolic, leaving behind one chapter to begin another, ascending into an uncertain but hopeful future. As she settled into her seat, a flight attendant approached her with a warm smile. "Miss Jones," she said, handing Alana a pair of noise-canceling headphones. "On behalf of the crew, thank you for everything you've done for us." Alana smiled, her chest tightening with emotion. "Thank you," she replied softly, her words carrying more weight than she could express. The hum of the engines was a comforting backdrop as the plane ascended into the sky. Alana gazed out the window, watching as the city below shrank into a patchwork of lights. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing she had done everything she could to leave the airline, and the people within it, better than she had found them. Months later, Alana stood at the podium of a global aviation summit, addressing leaders from airlines around the world. Behind her was a large screen displaying the name of the new initiative, Elevate, an industry united for inclusion and respect. Alana spoke with the same grace and conviction that had carried her through the most challenging moments of her career. She outlined the goals of the initiative, emphasizing the need for collaboration and accountability. "This isn't just about policies or programs," she said, her voice resonating through the room. "It's about creating a culture that values every individual, that recognizes the power of diversity, and that strives for equity in every aspect of our industry." The applause that followed was resounding. Industry leaders approached her afterward, expressing their admiration and commitment to the initiative. Alana felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced before. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a collective movement. Back at her former airline, the changes Alana had implemented continued to thrive. Employees shared stories of how the culture had shifted, of how they felt empowered to speak up and support one another. Customer reviews reflected the warmth and respect that had become hallmarks of the airline service. One day, a young woman joined the company as a flight attendant. She had read about Alana's story and was inspired to be part of an organization that valued inclusivity. On her first flight, she carried with her a quiet determination to continue the legacy that Alana had begun. As Alana walked through the halls of the initiative's headquarters, she felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever. She knew that the work she was doing now would extend far beyond her lifetime, shaping an industry that would better serve generations to come. Her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to everyone who had been inspired to stand up, to speak out, and to fight for a world where respect and dignity were not privileges, but rights. And as Alana stood before a new group of leaders, ready to guide them toward change, she realized that her journey was far from over. It was just beginning again. As a result, what began as a moment of quiet injustice turned into a powerful catalyst for change, proving that courage and determination can challenge even the most deeply rooted biases. Alana didn't just stand up for herself. She paved the way for a better future for everyone. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Join us for more compelling stories that reveal the power of resilience, justice, and humanity. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.